A soldier came home from the far waters of the Pacific with grief folded into his uniform and his mother's last letter pressed against his heart. Marcus Bennett had crossed oceans for his country. He had stood watch under black skies, heard alarms scream over steel decks, and learned how to stay calm when danger moved through the dark. But nothing on those distant waters prepared him for the battle waiting inside a marble bank in New York City. Not bullets, not storms, not enemies. Just a man in a tailored suit looking at his worn shoes, his tired eyes, his brown skin, and deciding he was nobody. Before we continue, comment what time you are watching and where in the world you are from, and do not forget to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you simply cannot miss. Marcus Bennett had been back in New York for only 5 days, but it still felt like he had arrived too late. 10 days earlier, while serving aboard a United States Navy vessel in the Western Pacific, somewhere beyond the crowded sea lanes near Asia, he had been called into a quiet room by the ship chaplain and his commanding officer. The moment he saw their faces, he already knew something in his life had broken. His mother, Ruth Bennett, had passed away in New York. She had been sick for months. Marcus learned that only after she was gone. She had hidden the worst of it from him because she did not want her illness to become another ocean he had to carry in his mind. Every time he called from the ship, she told him she was tired but fine. Every time he asked about the hospital visits, she laughed softly and said, "Do not worry about your old mother. You keep your eyes on the horizon and come home safe." But she had not been fine. By the time Marcus crossed the ocean on emergency leave, changed planes in Honolulu, waded through another connection in Los Angeles, and finally landed at John F. Kennedy International Airport, his mother had already been gone for nearly a week. He buried her 2 days later in Brooklyn. The church was full, but Marcus still felt alone. Nurses stood along the walls in dark coats and tired shoes. Former patients came with flowers and shaking hands. Neighbors brought food. Old women cried into folded tissues. A young man Ruth had once helped through nursing school stood at the pulpit and said that some people live quietly but leave behind thunder. Marcus sat in the front row and stared at the closed casket. He had spent years learning how not to break in front of others. That day he almost failed. 3 days after the funeral, he sat across from his mother's attorney, Thomas Miller, in a quiet office near Midtown Manhattan. Thomas was a careful man in his late 50s, with gray hair, kind eyes, and the serious voice of someone who had delivered too much bad news in his life. He placed a folder on the desk between them. "Marcus, your mother left everything to you." Marcus looked at the folder but did not touch it. Everything. Yes, her accounts, her property interest, her investments, her personal belongings. There is also a safe deposit box at Hamilton Trust Bank on Madison Avenue. She left specific instructions for you to open it first. Marcus frowned. "My mother had investments." Thomas nodded. "More than you know." Ruth Bennett was a remarkable woman. She lived simply, but she planned carefully. She owned a small brownstone in Brooklyn long before the neighborhood changed. She sold part of it at the right time. She invested through a community development fund. She saved from every shift, every bonus, every extra job. She did not tell you because she wanted you to serve without feeling tied to her sacrifice. Marcus looked down at his hands. "She should have told me she was sick." Thomas was quiet for a moment. "She said you would say that." He opened another envelope and slid it across the desk. "She wrote this for you, but she asked that you read it after you visit the bank." Marcus touched the envelope like it was fragile glass. "Why after?" "Because she wanted the safe deposit box opened first." Thomas took a breath. "I called Hamilton Trust this morning. They were notified before you arrived in New York. They know you are coming. They have copies of the will and the estate authorization. You only need to present your identification, the papers, and the key." Marcus nodded slowly. He was still wearing his service dress uniform. He had not meant to. He had planned to change after the attorney meeting, but the morning had collapsed around him. The uniform was clean, but the sleeves had travel wrinkles. His shoes were polished once, but salt, airports, and grief had left scuffs behind. His face was lean from duty and little sleep. His eyes were red, not from weakness, but from a sorrow that had not yet found a place to rest. Thomas stood and offered his hand. "Your mother trusted this bank." Marcus shook his hand. "Then I will go." Outside, New York City moved like nothing sacred had happened. Taxis honked. Delivery bikes slipped between cars. Men in dark coats hurried across sidewalks with coffee in one hand and phones in the other. The city did not pause for funerals. It did not bow for grief. It swallowed both and kept moving. Marcus took a cab to Madison Avenue. Hamilton Trust Bank stood inside a tall glass building, polished and cold, the kind of place that seemed designed to remind people that wealth had a language and not everyone was expected to speak it. Marcus stood outside for a moment. He touched the pocket inside his jacket where his mother's unopened letter rested. Then he stepped through the revolving door. The lobby was bright, expensive, and quiet in a way that made every footstep sound like an interruption. Marble floors, brass rails, white flowers in tall vases. Some security cameras tucked into corners. A chandelier hung overhead like the bank wanted to dress itself in importance. The moment Marcus entered, several people looked up. Not because he was loud. Not because he looked dangerous. Because he did not look like the kind of man they expected to see walking toward the private banking desk. At the reception station sat a woman named Karen Mitchell. She was in her early 30s, blonde hair pulled into a tight bun, pearl earrings, pale lipstick, and a smile that waited for permission before appearing. Marcus approached. "Good morning. My name is Marcus Bennett. I am here regarding the estate of Ruth Bennett." Hamilton Trust was notified by her attorney. Karen looked at his uniform, then his shoes, then the folder in his hand. "Ruth Bennett." "Yes, my mother." She blinked slowly. "Do you have an appointment?" Her attorney called ahead. "Do you have proof of that?" Marcus opened the folder. "I have the death certificate, the will, estate authorization, my military identification, my driver's license, and the safe deposit key." Karen took the folder with 2 fingers as if she wanted to touch as little of it as possible. "Wait here." Marcus nodded. "Thank you." She walked toward a row of glass offices. As she passed the teller counter, she leaned toward a man named Peter Lawson and whispered. Peter was in his late 20s, sharp suit, perfect hair, restless eyes. He glanced at Marcus and gave a small smirk. Marcus saw it. He had seen that look before. At airports, at restaurants, in stores, at car dealerships. Sometimes even while wearing the uniform of the country he served. It was the look people gave when they wanted to believe respect was available, but only for the right kind of person. Marcus stood straight. His mother used to say, "Stand tall, Marcus. Some people will try to make you bend because your dignity makes them uncomfortable." He heard her voice so clearly that for a second he almost turned, expecting to see her standing by the marble column with her old purse tucked under her arm. But she was not there. Karen returned with a man in a navy suit. He was tall, clean-shaven, silver at the temples, with a watch that flashed when he moved his hand. His nameplate read Richard Hayes, branch manager. Richard did not offer his hand. "Mr. Bennett." "Yes, sir." Richard held the folder against his chest. "You are claiming to be the son of Ruth Bennett." Marcus looked at him carefully. "I am not claiming. I am her son." Richard smiled in a way that made the room colder. "Of course. You say you are here regarding her estate." "That is correct." "Her attorney said you were expecting me." Richard glanced at Marcus' shoes. "We receive many calls. Mr. Bennett Hamilton Trust handles significant assets. We cannot simply release information because someone walks in wearing a uniform and carrying a story." The word uniform sat between them like an insult. Marcus kept his voice calm. "I understand procedure. I followed procedure for years in the Navy. I brought everything requested." Richard looked over the folder again. "Conference room C." Karen nodded. Marcus followed them across the lobby. He felt eyes moving with him. A woman in pearls paused over her deposit slip. A man in a gray coat lowered his newspaper. A young couple near the mortgage desk stopped talking. Conference room C was not really a conference room. It was a small glass room near the rear hallway beside the restrooms and the service elevator. The table wobbled when Marcus placed his folder on it. The chairs were hard. The air smelled faintly of cleaning supplies. Richard did not sit. He stood over Marcus. "Where exactly were you stationed?" Marcus looked up. "I am not sure that is relevant." "Humor me." Marcus stayed composed. "My ship was operating in the Western Pacific, near where open waters. That is vague. It is also all I am allowed to say." Richard raised his eyebrows. "Convenient." Marcus leaned back slowly. "Sir, my mother is dead. I flew home to bury her. I am here to handle what she legally left me. I am not here to argue." For the first time, Richard's face hardened. He was not used to being answered calmly by someone he had already placed beneath him. He opened the folder and spread out the documents: death certificate, will, military identification, driver's license, attorney letter, safe deposit key. He read in silence, then stopped. Marcus saw the change, a flicker of confusion, a touch of recognition, a flash of doubt. Then Richard pushed it away. "This cannot be right." Marcus did not move. "What cannot be right?" Richard tapped the will. "Your mother listed multiple accounts, investment holdings, property proceeds, a trust. You knew about this. Not all of it. You did not know your own mother had this level of assets." "My mother did not talk much about money. She talked about work, faith, and doing right by people." Richard gave a short laugh. "A nurse in Brooklyn somehow built an estate like this, and you had no idea. My mother worked for over 40 years. She owned property before prices changed. She invested. She saved. Maybe you should verify before you insult her memory." The room went still. At the glass door, Peter Lawson appeared with no reason to be there. Karen stood behind him. Richard noticed them but did not tell them to leave. Instead, he leaned forward. "Let me make something clear, Mr. Bennett. I have worked in banking for 20 years. I have seen every version of this: a death in the family, a grieving relative, a sudden will, a convenient story. Sometimes a uniform, sometimes tears. It is always urgent, it is always emotional, and often it is fraud." Marcus felt the word strike him. Fraud. His mother had been buried only 3 days earlier. Fraud. He still had dirt from the cemetery on his dress shoes. Fraud. He looked at Richard and spoke quietly. "Be careful." Richard blinked. Excuse me. Be careful with what you say next. Are you threatening me? I am telling you that grief makes a man remember every word. Richard stepped back, offended by Marcus' calm more than any shout. This meeting is over for now. No, sir, it is not. You have my documents. You have my identification. Your bank was notified. You can verify everything in minutes. Richard gathered the folder. We will determine what can be verified. Marcus had stood. Return my folder. Richard turned toward the lobby. Not at this time. Marcus followed. The moment they entered the open lobby, Richard raised his voice just enough for everyone to hear. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption. Marcus stopped. Richard continued, smooth and theatrical. We have an individual attempting to access estate assets without sufficient verification. Our staff is handling the matter with the seriousness it deserves. The lobby changed. People turned. Whispers started. Is he trying to steal from somebody? In uniform, too. That is shameful. Marcus felt his hands close into fists. Richard faced him. Until we complete a full internal review, we will not release account information, estate documents, or safe deposit access. Furthermore, I am retaining these papers pending investigation. Marcus took one step closer. Those are my mother's original documents. They may be evidence. Evidence of what? Richard looked him in the eyes. Attempted fraud. The word echoed. For a second, Marcus was no longer inside a bank. He was back on a steel deck in a black ocean, alarms cutting through the night, the body trained to respond before fear could rise. But this was not a battle he could win with force. This was a room full of witnesses waiting to see if pain would make him become what Richard already believed he was. A security guard near the entrance turned. His name was Samuel Price. Samuel was a broad black man in his late 50s, with tired eyes and a gray mustache. He had worked at Hamilton Trust for 11 years. He had seen Richard Hayes humiliate people before, immigrants with accents, elderly customers who did not understand forms, women in worn coats, men who looked poor. Anyone Richard decided did not fit the lobby. Samuel had swallowed his words for years. He had a wife with medical bills, a grandson he helped support, rent that never waited, a body getting older, a pension he was trying to reach. Richard pointed at Marcus. Security, escort Mr. Bennett out. Samuel took one step forward, then stopped. Mr. Hayes, maybe legal should verify first. Richard turned sharply. Now Samuel lowered his eyes. Marcus looked at him. For a moment, two men understood everything. Samuel knew Marcus was being wronged. Marcus knew Samuel knew, and still Samuel moved toward him. Please, brother, Samuel whispered, low enough that only Marcus could hear. Do not let him make you lose yourself. That sentence caught Marcus by the throat. Not Richard, not the cameras, not the crowd. Those words. Do not let him make you lose yourself. Marcus stepped back. Richard smirked. This is exactly why we follow procedure. Emotional instability is often a sign that something is not right. Peter laughed. A few customers laughed with him. Marcus reached into his jacket and touched the envelope from his mother. He did not open it. Not there. Not in front of them. He looked at Richard. My mother trusted this bank. Richard tilted his head. Your mother, if she truly was your mother, should have chosen more carefully who she left things to. The sentence landed harder than a slap. It touched Ruth Bennett's name. It touched her grave. It touched every double shift, every bus ride in the rain, every meal she skipped, every letter she wrote across the ocean. Marcus moved before he knew he had moved. Samuel stepped between them. Please, he whispered again. Please. Marcus stopped inches away. His chest rose and fell. Richard looked pleased, as if he had almost gotten exactly what he wanted. He raised his voice. Try the Veterans Charity Office downtown. They may be more prepared for your kind of paperwork. More laughter. Marcus turned toward the door. Every step felt heavier than the last. At the revolving door he stopped. He did not turn around. He only said, you will remember today. Then he walked out into New York. The cold hit him first. Then the sound. Traffic, horns, footsteps, sirens far away. The city kept moving as if nothing had happened. Marcus walked without knowing where he was going. He passed office towers and coffee shops, men in expensive coats. He crossed 2 streets without remembering the lights changing. Finally, he reached Bryant Park and sat on a bench beneath bare winter trees. For the first time since the funeral, his hands began to shake uncontrollably. Not from fear, from restraint. He had served his country. He had stood watch on waters most of those people could not name. He had missed his mother's final breath because he was doing his duty. He came home to claim what she had left him, and a man in a suit had turned his grief into entertainment. Marcus took out his mother's envelope. His name was written across the front. My son Marcus. He opened it with care. The handwriting was weak, but it was hers. My dear Marcus, if you are reading this, it means I have gone home to God before I could hold your face one more time. Do not be angry with me for not telling you how sick I was. You were serving, and I did not want my illness to become another ocean you had to cross in your mind. Marcus pressed the paper against his chest. He kept reading. I saved what I could, more than you know, more than I ever told you. I wanted you to come home to a life where you could choose peace, not because you are tired of fighting, but because you have already given enough. His eyes blurred. He heard her voice in every line. I know the world will not always see you clearly. Some people will look at your skin, your clothes, your shoes, or your silence and decide your worth before you speak. Do not accept their blindness as truth. Their suspicion does not stain your name. Their cruelty does not rewrite who you are. Marcus bowed his head. A tear fell onto the paper. The phone in his pocket rang. Thomas Miller. Marcus answered. Mr. Bennett, were you able to meet with Hamilton Trust? Marcus could not speak for a moment. Mr. Bennett, they accused me of fraud. Silence. Then Thomas' voice changed. Who did? The branch manager, Richard Hayes. He kept my mother's documents. He had security escort me out. He did what? Marcus looked across the park. He said my mother should have chosen more carefully who she left things to. Thomas was quiet so long Marcus could hear the wind moving through the bare branches. Listen to me carefully. Do not leave Manhattan. I am contacting the regional executive office now. I am also calling Margaret Collins. Who is Margaret Collins? Chairwoman of the bank's oversight board. Your mother knew her. Marcus frowned. My mother knew the chairwoman of Hamilton Trust. Years ago, Margaret Collins' son was in critical care after an accident. Ruth was one of the nurses who fought to keep him alive through the night. Margaret never forgot her. Your mother never bragged about it, but she had friends in places she never cared to use. Marcus looked down at the letter. Of course she did. Ruth Bennett helped people quietly, and somehow the world had kept receipts. Thomas continued. Marcus, this matters. Your mother was not just a customer. She was a long-term investor through a community fund. The bank has records. They know her name. They know her estate. What happened today is not a misunderstanding. Then what is it? Thomas' voice became hard. It is exactly what you think it is. Back inside Hamilton Trust, Richard Hayes returned to his office with the confidence of a man who mistook cruelty for control. He handed the folder to Karen. Scan these. Flag the estate. Mark potential fraud. Send a report to compliance. Karen looked uneasy. Richard, some of these documents look legitimate. He stopped. Did I ask for your legal analysis? No. Then do your job. Peter Lawson leaned against the doorway. That was intense. I thought he was going to. Richard loosened his tie. Of course he was. People like that count on intimidation. The uniform was part of the act. Karen looked down at the folder. But what if he really is Ruth Bennett's son? Richard gave her a cold smile. Then he should have learned how to present himself like one. Outside the office, Samuel Price heard every word. He closed his eyes. He had failed, not because he did not know right from wrong, because he knew and still obeyed. That was worse. He thought of Marcus standing in the lobby with grief in his face and discipline in his bones. He thought of the way Marcus looked at him, not with hatred, but disappointment. Samuel went back to his post. For the first time in 11 years, his uniform felt heavy enough to crush him. 20 minutes later, Richard's office phone rang. He answered with irritation. Richard Hayes. The voice on the other end was calm, female, and absolute. This is Margaret Collins. Are you currently holding documents belonging to Marcus Bennett, son of Ruth Bennett? Richard's smile faded. Yes, we have materials under review. Return them immediately. I am sorry. Who authorized I did? He sat straighter. Ms. Collins, there are serious concerns involving attempted fraud. There is no fraud. Marcus Bennett is the legal beneficiary of Ruth Bennett's estate. His identity is verified. The estate authorization is verified. Hamilton Trust was notified before his visit. Richard swallowed. We had inconsistencies. What inconsistencies? He did not present himself in a manner consistent with the asset profile. There was silence. Then Margaret said very softly, that sentence may be the most honest thing you have said today. Richard felt his stomach tighten. Ms. Collins, I only acted to protect the bank. No, Mr. Hayes. You exposed the bank. I am 6 minutes away. Do not destroy, alter, or move a single document. Do not speak to Mr. Bennett again unless I am present. The line went dead. Richard stared at the phone. Then another call came. Legal, then compliance, then regional security. By the time a black town car stopped in front of Hamilton Trust, Richard Hayes was standing behind his desk with sweat beneath his collar. Margaret Collins entered first. She was in her early 60s, tall, gray-haired, dressed in a dark coat, and composed in the way powerful people are composed when anger has become decision. Beside her walked Thomas Miller, carrying certified copies of every document Richard had seized. Behind them came Marcus Bennett. The lobby changed when he entered. His uniform was still wrinkled, his shoes were still scuffed, his eyes were still tired. But now he did not stand alone. And sometimes that is what power looks like. Not becoming louder, not becoming crueler, simply no longer standing alone where people hoped you would remain helpless. Samuel saw Marcus and lowered his head. Marcus noticed, but did nothing. Richard rushed from his office. Miss Collins, I can explain. Conference room. Now her voice cut through the lobby. Richard followed. So did Karen. So did Peter. So did Samuel. Thomas walked beside Marcus. No one laughed this time. They entered the same glass room near the back hallway. The same hard chairs. The same cheap table. The same view of the marble lobby where humiliation had been turned into spectacle. Margaret placed a folder on the table. Mr. Hayes, before you speak, you will listen. Richard sat slowly. Ruth Bennett was a client of Hamilton Trust for 38 years. She was an early participant in a community development investment program this bank proudly advertised for decades. Through disciplined saving, property ownership, and reinvestment, her estate grew substantially. She did not inherit wealth. She built it quietly. Richard opened his mouth. Margaret raised one hand. I said, listen. He closed it. She turned to Marcus. Mr. Bennett, on behalf of Hamilton Trust, I apologize. What happened to you today was degrading, discriminatory, and cruel. It violated our policies, our legal obligations, and basic human decency. Marcus looked at her. Thank you, but apologies sound different when they come before the damage. Afterward, they have to prove themselves. Margaret nodded. You are right. She opened another document. Your mother's trust includes multiple accounts, property proceeds from Brooklyn real estate, long-term investment holdings, and charitable instructions for a nursing scholarship. The safe deposit box contains personal letters, family records, and 2 wedding rings she wanted you to receive. Marcus went still. My father's ring. Yes. His jaw tightened. Margaret turned to Richard. All of this was visible through standard verification. His identity could have been confirmed in minutes. Instead, you publicly accused him of attempted fraud, retained his documents improperly, and ordered security to remove him. Richard cleared his throat. Based on his demeanor and lack of full knowledge regarding the estate, Marcus spoke. No, based on me, everyone turned. Marcus leaned forward. Not my documents, not the key, not the attorney letter, me, my shoes, my skin, my grief. You saw those things and decided my mother could not have left me anything valuable. Richard looked away. Marcus continued. I was in the Western Pacific when my mother died. I was standing on a ship serving this country while she took her last breath in New York. I came home too late to say goodbye. I buried her 3 days ago. I came here because her attorney told me this bank was expecting me. You took the last documents she left, called me a fraud, and made strangers laugh at my pain. Karen began crying silently. Peter stared at the table. Samuel looked as if every word was a weight placed on his chest. Marcus looked directly at Richard. You did not just disrespect me. You insulted a woman who spent over 40 years caring for sick people. A woman who rode buses through snow so she could save cab money. A woman who wore the same winter coat until the lining tore. A woman who skipped comfort so I could have a future. You looked at what she built and decided could not belong to someone like me, Richard whispered. I did not know. That is the problem. Marcus' voice remained calm. You think knowing who someone is should come before treating them like a human being. The room went silent. Margaret looked at Richard. Hayes security footage confirms the complaint. Audio was captured. Witness statements are being collected. You also submitted an incident report stating Mr. Bennett became aggressive, refused identification, and threatened staff. That report is false. Richard looked up quickly. I was protecting, suddenly spoke. No, sir. Everyone turned. Samuel stood near the wall, hands at his sides. You were protecting yourself. You were protecting the story you made up about him. I watched it happen. I should have spoken earlier. I did not. That is on me, but I will not lie now. Richard glared. Samuel, remember your position. Samuel took a breath. I am remembering it for the first time today. Marcus looked at him. Samuel turned to Marcus. Mr. Bennett, I am sorry. I helped remove you when I should have helped protect you. I have no excuse. Marcus held his gaze. No excuse is the beginning of truth. Samuel nodded. I wet. Peter shifted. Margaret looked at him. Mr. Lawson, you laughed. Peter swallowed. Yes. Why? He looked at Marcus, then down. Because Richard laughed. Because others were watching. Because I wanted to be on the safe side of the room, Marcus said quietly. There was no safe side. There was only the right side and the wrong one. Peter closed his eyes. Karen spoke through tears. I saw the documents. I knew they looked real. I should have said something. I was afraid of Richard. Margaret looked at her. Fear explained silence. It does not excuse it. Karen nodded. I know. Margaret closed the folder. Richard Hayes, effective immediately. You are suspended pending termination. Your access is revoked. Your bonus is frozen. Legal will review potential civil exposure. You will surrender your badge and office keys before leaving today. Richard stared at her. After 20 years. Margaret's voice did not soften. 20 years should have taught you a better. Richard turned to Marcus. Mr. Bennett, I made a mistake. Marcus shook his head. No, a mistake is writing the wrong date. A mistake is misplacing a file. You made a judgment. Then you built a public punishment around it. Richard looked like he had been struck. Marcus continued. I want my mother's documents returned now. I want the safe deposit box opened today. And I want you to apologize in the lobby where you humiliated me. Richard went pale. Margaret nodded. That is appropriate. The walk to the lobby felt like a march to a sentencing. Everyone watched again. Only now there was no laughter. The same customers who had whispered stood silent. Employees behind counters froze. A woman who had laughed earlier looked down at her purse as if it contained the shame she did not want to carry in her hands. Marcus stood in the center of the room. Richard stood beside him. For the first time all morning, his voice had no authority in it. Earlier today, I accused Marcus Bennett of fraud in this lobby. I did so without cause. His documents were valid. His identity was valid. His right to be here was valid. He swallowed. I treated him with disrespect. I insulted his late mother. I used my position to embarrass him publicly. I was wrong. He looked at Marcus but could barely hold his gaze. Mr. Bennett, I am sorry. Your mother deserved better from this bank. You deserved better from me. Marcus studied him. The apology was not enough. It could never undo the laughter. It could never erase Bryant Park. It could never give him back the hour when his mother's last words trembled in his hands because someone had turned her sacrifice into suspicion. But something in Richard's face had shifted. Not enough to heal. Enough to notice. Marcus spoke so the whole lobby could hear. My mother used to say a person does not become good because he is never wrong. A person becomes better when he stops defending the wrong he has done. Richard closed his eyes. Marcus continued. I hope you become better. Not for your comfort. Not so you can feel forgiven quickly, but because the next person who walks through those doors should not have to survive you. The lobby stayed silent. Then an elderly man near the teller line began to clap softly. Then another. Soon others joined. It was not celebration. It was shame finally learning how to make a sound. Margaret escorted Marcus to the vault herself. The hallway was quiet. The vault door was thick and round, like something from another century. An employee named Daniel Carter checked the key, verified the documents, and pulled out a long metal box. Marcus stared at it. His mother's life had become this small thing on a table. Margaret stepped back. Take all the time you need. Marcus opened the box. Inside were letters tied with blue ribbon, a small Bible with cracked leather, photographs, a velvet pouch, and an envelope, marked for my son when he comes home. His hands shook as he opened the pouch. 2 rings lay inside, his mother's wedding ring, his father's wedding ring, gold, simple, worn thin by years of love. Marcus sat down hard. He remembered his mother wearing both rings on a chain around her neck after his father died. She once told him love does not disappear just because breath does. He opened the envelope. My son, if the bank treated you kindly today, thank God for kind people. But if they did not, remember this. Their blindness does not reduce your worth. Their suspicion does not stain your name. Their cruelty does not get to rewrite who you are. Marcus pressed the paper to his mouth. She knew. Somehow Ruth Bennett had known the world well enough to leave courage inside an envelope. He read on. I saved this Muncie so you could choose your next life. You have served enough. You have stood watch for enough people. Now I want you to stand watch over your own peace. Buy a home if you want. Go back to school if you want. Start something that helps others if you want. But do not spend your life trying to prove your humanity to people committed to not seeing it. Tears fell freely now. There was no shame in tears inside a vault. No shame in grief. No shame in being a son who missed his mother. The final lines nearly broke him. Come home with your head high. And when you find someone standing alone in a room full of people, be the person who walks toward them. Always, your mother, Ruth Bennett. Marcus sat there for a long time. When he finally came out, Richard's office was dark. His nameplate had been removed. But stories like this do not end when the villain leaves the building. They continue in every person who watched. Samuel Price went home that night and told his wife everything. Not the softened version, not the version that made him look better. He told her he had helped escort a grieving man out of a bank after knowing the man was being wronged. His wife listened without interrupting. Then she said, "What are you going to do with the shame?" Samuel had no answer. 3 weeks later, he found one. A homeless veteran named Carl Jennings came into the same branch during a cold rain. His coat smelled damp, his beard was tangled. His hands shook as he asked for help replacing a lost debit card. A young teller became impatient and raised his voice. Samuel stepped forward. "There's a problem here," the teller said. "He does not have the right identification and he is making customers uncomfortable." Samuel looked at Carl, then at the teller. "This man is a customer. He will be treated with patience. If he needs identity support, call the proper department. If you cannot serve him respectfully, step aside and I will find someone who can." The teller blinked. Samuel did not move. Carl Jennings got his card replaced. Before leaving, he shook Samuel's hand and whispered, "Thank you for seeing me." Samuel went to the restroom afterward and cried quietly. Not because he was weak, because after 11 years of swallowing truth, he had finally spoken, and it felt like breathing after being underwater too long. Karen Mitchell left banking 6 months later. She was not fired. She completed the training, accepted the discipline, and received another chance. But she could not forget Marcus' face when Richard called him a fraud. She could not forget the folder in her hands and the fear that kept her silent. She took a job at a nonprofit legal clinic in Queens, helping grieving families with estate forms, housing disputes, and financial documents they did not understand. On her first day, an elderly man walked in holding a grocery bag full of papers. He apologized for the mess. Karen pulled out a chair beside him. "You do not need to apologize. We will go through it together." And when she said it, she thought of Marcus. Peter Lawson changed more slowly. Some people do. At first, he complained that the world had become too sensitive. He said Richard was made an example of. He said banking was impossible if employees could not question anyone. Then one evening, his own father, a retired mechanic from Ohio, called him from Chicago. He had tried to open an account at a private bank after selling his small house. He wore work boots and an old jacket. The bank made him wait for over an hour. They questioned where the money came from. They spoke to him like he was simple. His father tried to laugh it off. But Peter heard the hurt. For the first time, Peter understood that humiliation does not become real only when it happens to someone you love. It was always real. He just had not cared when it belonged to someone else. He wrote Marcus a letter. Marcus read it but did not answer for a long time. The letter said, "I laughed because I wanted to belong to the powerful side of the room. I was a coward. I am sorry." Months later, Marcus sent back one line. "Do not be sorry only in memory. Be different in the next room." Peter kept that line inside his desk drawer. As for Richard Hayes, his fall was public enough to hurt and private enough to haunt. Hamilton Trust terminated him after the investigation. His bonus was withheld. His reputation collapsed. Banks in New York, Boston, Philadelphia, and Chicago would not hire him. He applied to smaller firms and received polite rejections. Old colleagues stopped taking his calls. For the first few months, he blamed everyone except himself. Marcus had overreacted. Margaret had sacrificed him. The bank had become political. The world had changed. He said these things to his wife, Laura, until one evening she placed a printed transcript of the apology in front of him. "Did you say these words to that man?" Richard stared at the paper. "Yes." "Did you insult his dead mother?" "I was under pressure." Laura did not blink. She said nothing. She turned toward the apartment window overlooking the Hudson River. "My father was a janitor," she said. Richard looked up. She rarely spoke of her father that way. He cleaned office buildings at night for 30 years. He wore the same coat every winter. He packed the same sandwich every day. "He sent me to college. When we first met, you thought my family was comfortable because I spoke well and dressed well. You never asked what it cost them," Richard whispered. Laura, "No. Listen. If my father had walked into your bank wearing his work clothes, you would have treated him like Marcus Bennett." Richard opened his mouth, then closed it, because he knew. That was the first moment the truth entered him without permission. Not beautifully, not all at once. It came ugly. It came with shame. It came with memories. Every customer he had dismissed, every accent he had mocked, every elderly person he had rushed, every poor-looking client he had made wait, every document that became suspicious only after he saw the person holding it. A week later, Richard drove to Brooklyn. He parked across the street from the brownstone Ruth Bennett had once owned. The building had been renovated, but the old steps remained. A woman came outside carrying groceries. She asked if he was lost. Richard almost said no. Then he said, "I think I have been." That was not redemption. Redemption is not a sentence. It is a road. Richard began volunteering at an estate assistance clinic because no bank would hire him and because Laura told him he needed to do something with his shame besides drink it. At first, he hated it. He sorted papers. He copied forms. He sat with grieving people who did not understand legal language. He watched widows cry over account numbers. He watched sons shake while signing death certificates. He watched daughters hold folders like the weight of a whole life could fit inside paper. Then one afternoon, an old black woman came in with a plastic bag full of documents. Her husband had died. She was afraid the bank might take her home. She apologized for not having everything organized. Richard looked at the plastic bag. Then he saw Marcus' folder in his mind. He said, "You do not need to apologize. We will go through it together." The woman cried from relief. Richard went home that night, sat in his car for 20 minutes, and finally understood that power had made him careless, but shame had made him awake. Meanwhile, Marcus Bennett left active duty the following year. He did not leave because he was broken. He left because his mother had given him permission to live. He moved back to Brooklyn and used part of her estate to open the Ruth Bennett House, a community center for veterans, widows, nurses, working families, and anyone trying to navigate systems that often treated them like burdens. There was a legal clinic on Mondays, financial literacy on Wednesdays, veteran support on Fridays, estate help on Saturdays. In the front hallway, Marcus hung a framed photograph of his mother in her nurse's uniform. Under it were her words. "When someone stands alone in a room full of people, walk toward them." People came from all over New York City, Harlem, Queens, the Bronx, Staten Island, Newark, Philadelphia, Chicago, Los Angeles. They came with folders, grief, fear, and stories. Marcus listened. He became known not because he shouted, but because he made people feel seen. One rainy evening, almost 3 years after the bank incident, Marcus was closing the center when he saw a man standing outside beneath the awning. The man was thinner than Marcus remembered, older. His suit was plain. His hair had gone almost fully gray. Richard Hayes. Marcus opened the door. For a moment, neither man spoke. Richard held a folder in both hands. "I know I have no right to come here." Marcus said nothing. Richard continued, "I am not here to ask for anything. There is a widow in Queens. Her husband's pension was mishandled years ago. Hamilton Trust was involved. I thought your legal team might know how to help her." Marcus looked at the folder. Why bring it yourself? Richard breathed out. Because I wanted to stand in front of you without hiding behind an email. And because I owe you more than an apology, I was forced to give in a lobby. Rain tapped against the awning. Richard swallowed. I need to say it properly. I was not just rude. I was racist. I was cruel. I used my position to make you small because I had trained myself to confuse wealth with worth. I insulted your mother because I could not imagine a woman like her building something greater than men like me. I have thought about that every day. Marcus watched him closely. Richard looked down. I lost my job. I lost friends. For a long time, I thought that was the punishment. It was not. The punishment was realizing how many people I had hurt before you and never noticed. His voice broke. I am sorry, Marcus. Not because I got caught, because I finally understand that you walked into my bank as a grieving son, and I chose to become another wound. Marcus stood in the doorway. The old anger was still there. It would always be there in some form, but it no longer controlled the room. His mother's voice moved through him. A person becomes better when he stops defending the wrong he has done. Marcus opened the door wider. Come in out of the rain. Richard looked startled. Marcus said, This does not erase what happened. I know, and I am not giving you easy forgiveness for your comfort. I understand, but if that widow needs help, we will help her. Richard stepped inside. He looked at Ruth Bennett's photograph on the wall. For a long time, he could not look away. She looks kind, he said. Marcus answered, She was stronger than kind. Kindness was just how her strength came dressed. Richard nodded with tears in his eyes. The widow in Queens got her pension corrected. Richard kept volunteering. He never became famous for it. He never became a hero. That mattered. Some people want redemption to look like applause. Real repentance often looks like paperwork, humility, and showing up when no one is filming. Marcus never forgot what happened at Hamilton Trust. He did not want to forget. Forgetting can sometimes become a way of protecting the guilty and abandoning the wounded, but he also refused to let that day become the whole story of his life. His mother had not saved for decades, so he could live forever inside one man's cruelty. She had saved so he could build. So he built. One summer afternoon, the Ruth Bennett House held its first scholarship ceremony. The room was packed with folding chairs. Nurses stood beside veterans. Teenagers sat beside widows. Lawyers sat beside janitors. People who might never have shared a room anywhere else came together under Ruth Bennett's name. Marcus stood at the podium. He wore a dark suit, polished shoes, and his father's wedding ring on a chain beneath his shirt. In the front row sat Margaret Collins, now retired. Samuel Price sat beside his wife. Karen Mitchell sat near the aisle with clinic folders in her lap. Peter Lawson stood quietly in the back. Richard Hayes stood near the doorway. He did not sit in front. He did not want attention. Marcus saw him, then looked at the crowd. My mother believed dignity was not something people earned after proving themselves, he began. She believed dignity was the starting point. The first thing we owe each other, before status, before money, before titles, before addresses, before clothes. The room was silent. Marcus continued. When I came home from service after my mother died, I walked into a bank with her documents in my hand and grief in my chest. I was judged before I was heard. Many people in that room saw it. Some laughed, some stayed silent, some later found the courage to change. He paused. I used to think the lesson was that people should be careful who they disrespect because that person might turn out to be powerful. But that lesson is too small. That still makes respect depend on hidden status. He looked across the room. The real lesson is this. Be careful who you disrespect because they're human. That should be enough. A woman in the second row wiped her eyes. Marcus lifted the first scholarship certificate. My mother worked more than 40 years. She saved quietly. She gave quietly. She loved loudly only in private, where it mattered most. This scholarship is for students from families like mine. Families where sacrifice wears old shoes. Families where love takes the bus in the rain. Families where wealth is not always visible, but worth is everywhere. The applause rose slowly, then filled the room. Richard clapped too, not loudly, with his head bowed. After the ceremony, Marcus found him standing near Ruth's photograph. Richard said she changed more lives than she knew. Marcus looked at the photograph. She knew. She just did not need credit. Richard smiled sadly. I wish I had met her, Marcus answered. In a way you did. You met what she raised. Richard accepted that like both a wound and a mercy. That night, after everyone left, Marcus stayed behind to fold chairs. Samuel helped him. You know you could hire people for this, Samuel said. Marcus smiled. My mother would haunt me if I got too proud to fold chairs. Samuel laughed softly, then he grew quiet. I still think about that day. So do I. I should have walked toward you. Marcus stacked another chair. You walk toward people now. Samuel nodded. Every chance I get. That counts, Marcus said. Outside Brooklyn glowed under streetlights. The city was still loud, still imperfect, still full of rooms where people stood alone, while others watched, but somewhere, because of Ruth Bennett, because of Marcus, because shame became courage in a few wounded hearts, some people were learning to walk toward them. Years later, Marcus would tell the story to young recruits not as a tale about revenge, but as a warning. The battlefield is not always overseas, he would say. Sometimes it is a lobby, sometimes it is a counter, sometimes it is the moment you decide whether to laugh, stay silent, or speak. He would tell them courage is not only running toward danger with a weapon in your hand. Sometimes courage is telling your manager no. Sometimes courage is admitting you were wrong. Sometimes courage is returning to the room where you were humiliated and standing there without surrendering your soul. Sometimes courage is choosing not to become cruel after cruelty has touched you. And he always ended with his mother's words. When someone stands alone in a room full of people, walk toward them. That is the whole lesson. Not because they might be rich. Not because they might know someone powerful. Not because a hidden camera might be recording. Not because the world might punish you if you fail. Walk toward them because they are a person. Walk toward them because dignity should never have to prove itself. Walk toward them because one day you may be the one standing alone, holding a folder, carrying grief, hoping someone in the room still remembers how to be human. Marcus Bennett came home from distant waters with a broken heart and a mother's letter. He walked into a bank and was treated like a thief. He walked out with pain. He walked back in with truth, and in the end, he did more than claim an inheritance. He protected a legacy. Ruth Bennett had left him money, yes, but more than that, she left him a mission. To stand tall, to build something good, to keep his head high, and to remind the world that respect is not a luxury for the wealthy. It is not a reward for the polished. It is not a gift from the powerful. It is the minimum. It is the beginning. It is what we owe. And if we forget that, then we lose more than manners. We lose ourselves. But if we remember, if we choose courage in the small rooms, if we speak when silence would be easier, if we walk toward the person everyone else has decided not to see, then maybe one act at a time, one voice at a time, one open door at a time, we can become the kind of people Ruth Bennett believed we could be. And that is how the world changes, not all at once. Not with speeches alone, but with one person deciding humiliation will not have the final word. One person deciding grief will not be mocked. One person deciding old shoes can carry a noble soul. One person deciding to walk towards someone standing alone. So when your moment comes, and it will come, choose carefully. You can be the one who laughs. You can be the one who records. You can be the one who looks away. Or you can be the one who steps forward. Marcus Bennett never forgot who stepped forward. He never forgot who failed to. And neither will the person waiting for your courage.